If you want to grab it. If you want to grab a seat, we'll be starting in about 5 minutes at, actually in 2 minutes, around 6. So I did invite everyone who wants to stay for the MRB launch to come grab a seat. I know when there's wine and chit-chatting, we can keep chit-chatting after the readings. Or just keep chit-chatting. So welcome to the spring issue launch of the Montreal Review of Books. I'm Rebecca West, our publisher and executive director of the Association of English Language Publishers of Quebec. It's so wonderful to see all of you gathered here. Thank you for coming out to support the festival, our talented local authors and publishers, and hello to everyone tuning in online. As publisher of the MRB, and on a more personal note, as a white settler with roots in Ireland and the Netherlands, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered in a place known as Jojage in the Kanien'kehá:ka language and Muniang in the language of the Anishinaabe. As a publication celebrating local books, we strive to honor the first storytellers of these lands, and today aim to give visibility to our contemporary Indigenous writers. For fans of YA fantasy, this issue features a review of Cree author Coltrane's Sikwasi's promising debut, Secrets of Stone, out now from Kegedon's Press, and I believe he'll be at the festival as well. I'd like to thank our amazing MRB team for putting this great issue together, our editor, Malcolm Fraser, our interim associate editor, Emma Delory, associate publisher, Alexandra Swenny, graphic designer, David Leblanc, all of our reviewers and illustrators, our live stream collaborators at the Community Digital Arts Hub, as well as our board of directors. Thank you to Ali Gator, who created our beautiful cover inspired by La Belle-mère, the Stepmother, by Rachel McCrum and Émilie Provost. In January of this year, we received some sad news that our long-standing national ad sales manager, Michael Weil, had actually passed away. It was quite a surprise. He had been with the MRB since 2001 and developed quite a vast network of partners and advertisers across the country who he kept in contact with the old-fashioned way by telephone. So he didn't only work with us, he also worked with Prairie Books Now, the Literary Review of Canada, and Atlantic Books Today. One of our early editors, Ian McGillis, put it simply, he was our rock. So we miss him greatly, and he is originally from Nova Scotia. For anyone who may be in that neck of the woods, I know there will be a celebration of life in April. In other happier team news, after the departure of Nivaid last fall, we've begun the process of filling the associate editor position. So the posting is now up on our website, and if you're interested, come chat with us after the readings, or check the posting up on the MRB site. Finally, I'd like to express gratitude to our wonderful funders, the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Council for the Arts, SODEC, Conseil des Arts de Montréal, as well as our advertisers. The MRB would really not be possible without your generous support. We have a great event lined up for you this evening with readings by 3 writers featured in the issue, Rachel McCrum and Leila Marshy, and Oana Avasilichioaei. Thank you to Paragraph Bookstore for providing the book sales this evening. Please pick up a copy if you haven't already. I'll hand things over now to Marie-André Lamontagne, Directrice Générale Programmation et Communication at Blue Metropolis.
I have to use that microphone, not the other one. Okay. Very briefly, I'm very happy to be here, and it's a real pleasure for us at the Blue Metropolis team to be sharing this venue and this event with the Montreal Review of Books. It's a much appreciated partner, and I'd go so far as to say a natural one, since literature is our common playground. I wrote a few notes because I don't want to make mistakes in English, so please be soyez indulgents. I look forward to each issue of Montreal Review of Books, and today's issues is no exception. It's really, I'm really looking to hear the reading and everything. So thank you very much, Rebecca. Enjoy your reading your issue of Montreal Review of Books, and enjoy the reading that will start in a moment, I would say. Okay. And come to Blue Metropolis, of course.
Marie-André, I'll now invite our editor, Malcolm Fraser, to come up and introduce our readers.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for coming out. Yeah, we have got some important heavy hitters here tonight. We have, of course, founding editor Kimberly Bourgeois. We have Ryan McDonald, who runs our website for the MRB, very much appreciated. And we got F.G. Fife somewhere, who wrote the poetry roundup this this month, and many valued contributors. But right now, I wanted to introduce the first of our readers and performers tonight. Excuse me, sorry. Rachel McCrum is a poet, performer, and workshop facilitator. Her debut collection, The First Blast to Awaken Women Degenerate, was translated by Jonathan Lamy, published in a bilingual edition with Mémoire d'un Crier in fall 2020. It was a finalist for the Prix de Traduction de la Fondation Cole from the Quebec Writers Federation in 2022. She's the vocalist for noise poetry group Pigs and Wolves, and she's also the co-author and co-performer with Amélie Prévost, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, of La Belle-mère, the Stepmother, published also in a bilingual edition by Lexagon in 2024. Please welcome Rachel McCrum.
Yeah, I think that looks good. Sounds good. Just going to move this chair. It's very close. Sorry, stage dressing. Thank you very much to the Montreal Review of Books. I didn't know that about the cover. Amélie will be delighted. So I am here as one half of a duo. Amélie's actually playing in the Theatre Prospero in Corrières, if anybody wants to go down and see her do that. But I think before I get started in the reading, I just wanted to explain a bit. The book, which originally always started out as a performance piece, we both come from poetry and performance background, was always designed to be written entre quatre mains, between four hands. Amélie writes in French, I write in English. We're both poets. We're both stepmothers. We're both stepmothers in a particular situation where when we met and we started to talk about it, our stepdaughters were just hitting adolescence and dealing with a pandemic, and we were slowly panicking and dealing with that. Big conversations. And we don't have our own biological children, so we were aware that we were coming from a very specific background for this project. When we embarked on it, we were also aware that we didn't want to expose our own stepdaughters and the families associated with them too much, and also we wanted to understand more about the commonalities of stepfamilies. So we undertook 12 interviews with other stepmothers, stepfathers, stepchildren, both in Quebec, in the UK, in Scotland and Ireland, to try and understand different cultural contexts and try and understand what was the theme, what story could we draw out from this. And so the story that is presented in The Stepmother, which is of a particular stepmother, is drawn from all those different stories. What else can I say about it? The writing in French and English, I can't even explain this anymore. She wrote some poems in French, and then I wrote some in English, and then we translated them into each other's languages, and then we created an entirely English version of the show and an entirely French version of the show, some of which are original and some of which are translation. I hope that's clear. You can just come and see it at some point. Pick the French show or the English show, and you'll see it come together. It was an amazing process. Amélie is fabulous, and we were very pleased to find that our writing styles had started to merge slightly before the end, to the point that I was like, I've written an Amélie poem, I've written a Rachel poem, even in different languages. So I'm going to read you 5 poems from the piece, which sort of take us a little bit over the arc. It's a suite of 21 poems. The joke in the back of my mind is this is secretly a musical, and if anybody actually wants to put a musical score to it, we will happily give it to you. There are 2 characters. There is the principal character, who is the stepmother, who is living through this crisis, and then there's what we've come to call the blue voice, who is much more of a mysterious character. She's part evil stepmother, part fairy godmother. She's part the voice at the back of the head. She's part solace. She's part critique. She loves talking to the audience about what you think about stepmothers. I love playing her. But it always begins with a love story. A love story sparking into life at the end of the world, where who we are is nowhere to be found. We exchanged rogue cigarettes, let loose our bags, sent the anchor chains sinking to the seafloor, circled one another deliciously. Look, it was a holiday hotel hookup in a swimming pool. But see how we plunged in? raw unknowns, frissons crackling through chlorine and underwater blue and starlight. And before we tumbled together, I managed to cast just one line, wildly fishing for inconvenient truths. Do you live with my daughter? Oh, are you? No. Oh. Oh. Fools leaping into a tattered watering hole, falling hard on blind faith, only each other's words to take for any of it. I saw the gravity in him from the start. The center made solid for orbiting satellites, something holding itself for stable for so long. You're so, I know, I've never met, I'm not that. We took our leave of one another like kites, abruptly untangled, set skyward in opposite directions, sweeping back to Earth at frightening velocities, crashing. I gathered up the thread, shot back a lifeline, slender, trembling, new, direct to the chest. I do too. Shall we? Yes. In his second missive, a photograph of his daughter, the writing huge against the sky. This is the most precious thing in the world to me. The blue voice enters the chat. Il était une fois. Un garçon qui, en grandissant, devenu beau-père, dont le beau-fils devint très, très connu. Quand Joseph meurt, personne n'en parle. C'est tout plus une évidence. Les gens naissent, les gens meurent. Pas de quoi y consacrer un chapitre du livre. Pourtant, Joseph l'avait guidé partout et si longtemps. L'enfant béni, l'enfant parfait, l'enfant sacré, les saints des saints, parce que c'était un privilège de soutenir son existence, un honneur, une faveur d'être en présence de l'enfant béni, l'enfant parfait, l'enfant sacré, les saints des saints, avait-on dit à Joseph. Seule une très mauvaise personne aurait choisi de refuser son amour et son soutien à une fille mère et ses beaux grands yeux tristes, toute seule pour élever l'enfant béni, l'enfant parfait, l'enfant sacré, les saints des saints. A-t-il seulement versé une larme, brisé un vase, craché un regret, quand il a vu partir celui qui était là depuis le premier jour, comme si ça allait de soi? Après, Joseph a consacré ses plus belles années, assise de son mieux de protéger et élever l'enfant béni, l'enfant parfait, l'enfant sacré, les saints des saints, sans jamais remettre en question le fait qu'il soit vraiment l'enfant parfait, l'enfant sacré, l'enfant parfait, les saints des saints, parce que seul un vrai parent peut remettre en question l'aspect divin de son enfant. Après tant d'années d'un amour imparfait mais constant, Joseph ne se vit même pas accorder un chapitre du livre. Pas de funérailles, pas de fleurs, pas un mot pour dire « Hey, merci pour le brunch de dimanche, la boîte à outils ». Les fois quand l'autre père se faisait trop impénétrable, mais récolter quand même l'essentiel des crédits parce que, selon la croyance populaire, créer quelque chose a plus de valeur que de s'en occuper. Rien. Quand Joseph meurt, l'enfant béni, l'enfant parfait, l'enfant sacré, les saints des saints passent l'affaire sous silence. The stepmother. Perfectly clear, warm weather washes over our bowls where some abandoned berries float in a puddle of milk. Her cartoon at low volume avoids waking the peaceful sleeper who lets the minute hand continue to turn on one of those first Sundays falling softly between my hands. A voice like a tickling feather says, "I have an idea. We could." Her little laugh on ha, suggesting a joke to play together at the expense of her dad. Everything was suspended in this new intimacy where nobody existed but us, and which nobody would remember but us, and which we would perhaps recall with nostalgic winks at the edges of a shared future. In this suspended moment, the first connivance. In this connivance, my huge wonder. In this wonder, a dull, insidious fear. If there is complicity, there is a bond. And if there is a bond, I will have to take care of it from now on. But what trust is this hand call for which I extend without having fully tested its strength? What do I know at the bottom of it about which dreams to build and which frames to hang at the fledgling horizon? What right do I have to be loved by someone else's child? So there's a lot of questioning. Because there's a lot of questioning. And there's no rule book. We discovered that. The blue voice. So we are unmothers, non-mothers, others. Where in the world did they cook up this costume? Tailor it tight around our unwelcome bodies, shroud us in fearful story and unpopular song. The cold, hard science is that we are foreign bodies. We are a reminder of broken bonds, a changed environment, whether catalyst or displacement. We are a product of an unstable state. Language puts us a step over, a step up, a step away, a step apart, the outlier, the extra, the unnecessary, the one too much, the marginal. We signify the superfluous, the third wheel, the imbalance. The law holds us to nothing much. Inconvenient, inessential, a sigh. We only counted legally after 2012. Nothing is taken as given. No legacy passed on as a matter of course. How the eyes of the law glide past aberrations, glitches, awkward monsters in an ordered world. The collective imagination birthed us as something hideous and manipulative, unambivalent in our ambition, our cruelty, better a serpent than a stepmother, as Euripides had it, long before the grim boys came along, made us the convenient plot device undulating through European folklore, threatening the children, the future. Nations have been founded on the myth of the importance of the purity of family lines, the unexploded nuclear, the neat, the garden fence, whole continents colonized by state payment per newborn baby, preferably white, by the nation builders, the breeders, the preservers of language and lineage, and by sheer overwhelming numbers. In the sanctity, in the eyes of the ages, how are we to compete with the sanctity of maternal love, the most fundamental criterion of femininity? The womb, the mother, and the too late other, our unpregnant bellies, unsuckled teats. What child-worshipping, mother-adoring, patriarch-deifying institution has use for those? They do like to know where our genitals have been, keep track of the cunts in the parish, never quite so keen on keeping score of the cocks, but a womb unused except for pleasure, succubus, sorceress, barren witch, childless cat lady. Oh, do we become awkward in social situations? Facsimile mothers, one too many for the barbecue, missing a certain common ground, a biological urge. The things that we will never understand, and the things that we cannot pretend to know. Beside them, at the clinic, or at the airport check-in, or when we must phone the school to let them know they'll be late again. We identify ourselves stiffly, correctly, hastily enough to spare their confusion, and watch as the eyes of the world adjust, slip a heavy purple cloak around our shoulders. I'm the stepmother? Yes. The stepmother.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to invite up our next reader, Leila Marshy. Leila Marshy is of Palestinian Newfoundland parentage, which might explain a lot. Her words, not mine. She has worked for the Palestine Hospital in Cairo, the Palestinian Mental Health Association in Gaza, and Medical Aid for Palestine in Montreal. She founded a groundbreaking community group bringing Hasidim and their neighbors together for dialogue. Thank you for that. I think we could all use a bit more dialogue these days. She's been a baker, a chicken farmer, an early mobile app designer, a film editor, and a political campaigner. Her first novel, The Philistine, was published in 2018, and her new short story collection, My Thievery of the People, is out now and available right at the table here. Welcome, Leila.
This is good, yeah. That's a hard act to follow. I'm going to read my one Newfoundland story in the book because I've never read it. The proper thing was my uncle's boat. He had left Newfoundland and moved to North Bay and would take his boat down every year. He had four kids, and would just go down himself every summer and spend the summers in Newfoundland, pick up my mum when we lived in Montreal, and then when we moved to Ottawa, pick up my mum often. They'd go down and spend the summer in St. Albans, where they were from, which is on the south shore, south coast. It's an outport. This story is not about that, but I loved the name of his boat, The Proper Ting. A little girl saw it first. She had been roaming the beach, gathering shells, dancing along the water's edge every time a wave hit. Then a mound of sea stuff blocked her path. Strange it was, a bundle of something wrapped in crackling dulse, as if ready to be shipped. Under the dark, stringy layers were smooth pink limbs that had spent the night tumbling over themselves back towards the shore. It stunk of maggoty fish heads, the girl screamed. I forgot to say thank you to the Montreal Review of Books. I really meant to do that. I really appreciate it's not a given getting reviewed, and the Montreal Review of Books is a great institution. Thank you, Malcolm and Rebecca. The girl screamed. 2 mornings later, Mrs. Wilcott comes over and knocks. I freeze, my stomach seizing up in mid-retch. Hello, hello, she says through the cracks. My dear, are you home? I wipe my mouth. Mrs. Wilcott, I'm a little busy. I'm leaving soon, and I know, but some awful news there is. I'm sure you heard. Oh, I thought she knew better. Really, I did. Shall I pour us some tea? I'm really trying not to channel Rachel's accent, but it's hard. So close. She pretends that we're only gossiping, but I wonder if she came out of mercy because she knew I'd be grieving alone. That's how they are here. I make the tea and try to distract her by apologizing for the piles of clothes, the dirty dishes, the boxes. She should have known better, she says again, going out in that sea alone. She must have been missing him some bad, hey? Trying to meet him up the bay she was. By the way, Mrs. Wilcott looks at me. I know we both know that this isn't true. By the time she leaves, the sky is purple and the tea long cold. I tape the last box and stack it with the others in the car. Most people probably expect me to stay, but they are the same people who want me to leave. Months earlier, I had knocked on a door to start my interviews, and the woman who answered it told me to call her Sinjin. It was her husband I would be wanting, she told me, but he had taken a second job and wouldn't be back for a week or 2. Then she told me Sinjin was an old way of pronouncing St. John. Isn't that a boy's name, I asked. True enough, she said. My parents were playing tricks, wouldn't you know? My dad didn't see the naked me for weeks. He was right surprised when he did, I tell you. That's quite a story. It gets better, she said, stepping aside to let me in. But I had been warned about how people will go on and on if you let them. It was only the first week, and already my goal of starting one case study a day had evaporated. I think I should go. I can come back another time. Come now, she said. Who leaves in the middle of stories? I hesitated. Okay, here's another. First off, you're pronouncing it all wrong. You don't say it like hope. It's pronounced despair. So baie d'espoir is baie despair. It's the exact opposite of what you think. But the exact opposite of what I thought was that it wasn't normal for her eyes to close in on me like that, like she was both trawler and net. I went back the next day. You've been keeping accurate records of your catches, I assume. I should have been asking her husband. There was protocol for that. Of course, she said. This takes place after the moratorium in Newfoundland, by the way. I forgot to say that. Of course, she said. Then how about that tea? She went to the kitchen, her body heavy and lithe and strong all at once. She moved like a dancer, I thought. No, a fish. I stayed where I was on the threshold. Okay, I'm skipping a lot of parts. I've edited this for the reading. Autumn's not halfway started, and already you're looking like 3 layers of wet wool, she said, sipping. I pulled out my notes, but they fluttered in the breeze of an open window. I couldn't take my eyes off her fingers curling around the cup. Is this your first time to Newfoundland? She asked. Yes, it's my first time. Well, there's a first time for everything. She showed up a couple of days later with 2 bicycles. She liked the warm days of September, driftwood days, she called them, newspaper gray days imprinted with the smell of salt. The half-awakened wind through her hair reminded me of when I stepped off the ferry, sea breeze meeting rock breeze like 2 scaly lovers. When she told me her husband had been piloting the ferry, my front wheel skidded on the gravel and I fell on my hands, scraping the skin clean off them. She ran me down to the shore's edge and plunged them into the cold, stinging water, laughing like it was nothing. She said he did nothing but work, spending his time either catching fish or ferrying people, but that both are the same, aren't they? And these days, it's more people than fish anyways. My job was to work with the fish, not like a proud fisherman, not dredging the sea between here and Norway, filling the hold with enough to last a season, carrying them home in a bucket, gutting one in the sink and laying it on a plate. Instead, I visited outports, wharfs, and processing plants all along the southern coast, as far away as Ramia and Burgeo to the west, and then along Fortune Bay to the east. I was to count them down and round them off, scrutinize catches and ensure adherence and monitor compliance, take names and issue quotas, and then report my findings. But I found myself counting curls and reading her expressions instead of ministry guidelines. I started to hear her laughter in the shy morning tide and see the curves of her hips in the hummocks behind the village. She took to banging on my door at sunrise. Let me show you what this rock is all about, she'd say, just so you know who it is you're messing with. Monday, she brought me to the beach. Tuesday, she put a kettle on the stove and showed me old photographs. Wednesday, she took me up the hill behind the village. She wore big boots and the nettles cracked when she walked. I inhaled details like bake apple berries, the green-gray matchsticks of moss, the ruddiness of her cheeks, a shoulder where the sweater fell, the long, hard lines of her thighs as we climbed. Birds screeched and she followed the sound, thinking we might have to rescue an animal. I couldn't have cared less about the animals, but followed her higher over the ridge, following, just following. She stopped in her tracks, and I wondered if she had seen a rabbit or a moose, but she turned around and ran her hands inside my jacket. That was the first time. The next morning, she took me on her boat. I thought that maybe we should talk about him, that maybe we should address this current, the growing squall, the tidal wave. He was still plying the channel waters, not knowing a storm was brewing in the bay, but I ran out of metaphors. Not a word from you, she said. He has his summer and I have mine. Does it even matter? She threw the last of the mooring line on the deck, then softened, come. This one is my boat. The proper ting was a small, rusted in parts, its white paint decorated with bouquets of barnacles under the waterline. But I was amazed at how big it was once we boarded. I was amazed at how endless the sea was once we were released from land. I don't know what kind of summers the Indians had, how the fishing was when the English fired at the Beothuk from off the shore. British boats snuck into the bays at night and lobbed delirious cannon shot at anything that moved, hunted like animals and forced inland, away from the coast's rich resources. The last Beothuk died 2 centuries ago. That's what she said to me. No one is innocent here, she said. Everyone smells of either fish or blood. No wonder the fish are leaving. They were never ours to begin with. Maybe the moratorium will bring new life to the province, I offered. Maybe it's a chance to start fresh. You think, she said. And are you here to tell me what we're supposed to do then? Do I retrain as a what? Do you have a job for me in Ottawa? She rose with a cresting wave. There are things you can do, places you can go. No, she said, and no. Oh, come here, she said. Stop your pouting. Let me show you something. She turned the engine off and grabbed a buoy with a long hook. I'm going to give you a real job. She taught me how to pull the net and hold the wheel and watch the waves. She showed me where the knife goes and just how hard you have to slice. Hold down with your other hand, don't let it slip, and don't be afraid of pushing. And quickly, you don't want to lose time. And then she laughed. And you don't want it to remember your face. She stuffed their white-ribbed holds with summer savory and saved the soft cheeks for me to fry, and laughed when I ate them. Afterwards, I staggered at the warmth of her mouth in the wet, spitting wind. The bow rose higher and higher with every wave, while seagulls pretended not to look. That was the second time. After that, we lost count. That's it.
Thank you, Leila. So we have one more performance for you. I'd like to welcome Oana Avasilichioaei. She is, I have to find my author bios. Here we go. She interweaves sound, poetry, performance, and translation to expand and trouble ideas of language, histories, polyphonic structures, and borders of listening. She's created many performance sound works that mix electronics, ambient textures, noise, and vocal play, and published 7 collections of poetry hybrids, including 8-track from 2019, Liminal from 2015, and Chambersonic from 2024, available right over here. And also written a libretto for a 1-act opera called Cells of Wind. She's based in Montreal, Sherbrooke, and I'd like to welcome her to the stage for this very special performance. I told her, I said, we don't usually have this many effects pedals, but, you know, try to keep things unpredictable around here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. It's great to be here. First, Rachel and Leila, it's wonderful to be here with you. And thank you to the MRB. Reviews are indeed not a given, especially for poetry. So I'm very grateful for all that. Chambersonic is a book that is said to be poetry, and there is poetry in it, but there is also essay, there's also performance scores, there are also sound works which are accessible by QR codes. There are also images, so it's all of that I do see as poetry, but it might not immediately appear so. So I'm going to do one work. The text, a version of this text is also in the book. This is called Electro Echoes. voices will one day ignite and spill over. They will not retract, but keep on spilling. Some voices will blur, congregate, and frolic. Unravel the lineages of lexicon and grammar. Some voices will shift the tone of the hour. Some voices will shift the tone of the hour from frequency to oscillation. Others will be placed on the pyres of history to burn and burn and burn, but they will not burn out. Some voices will cry out, not just in pain, of which they will do plenty, but also in wonder. Some will volatile. They will periphery, then amass and ricochet to center. Others will speak in code, or what appears as code. They will be the ones least understood, but also the ones most worth trying to decipher. Some voices will draw blood from bodies, from lineage, from structure, from avatars of nation states. Others will sandstorm, bicker over boundaries of ethics in armed conflict. Others will vestige, refuse to be specimens and be exemplars only of themselves. Some will trip over borders, mole and drown over them, wall and war over them. They will ambush. Some voices will extract. Some will flute and funnel. Some will migrate. Others will go extinct. Be a footnote in a book, background noise in a recording, a rumor, a legend, a memory. Some, however, will leave no trace.
Thank you, Oana. So cool. I'd like to invite all of our featured readers and performers to come sit with me at this round table, and we'll answer a few questions, have a little brief discussion. So, yes, that was so cool. Thank you so much for that. I'll start with a question for you, Oana, since you're fresh off the performance. I mean, I have so many things I feel like I could ask about that. I'm curious about all of your gear, but I don't want to get into that. I know it's not the time or place for that. But I more wanted to.
We could get into that. We could get into that.
I wanted to ask about one of the phrases, and it's kind of noted from memory, so it may not be exactly correct, but you said, some speak in code or what appears as code, but they are also the ones most worth trying to decipher. That phrase stuck with me, and I wondered if you could unpack it a little bit for us.
Thank you. Well, I think that's a good question. It's an interesting question. But I think a lot of what that maybe gets at the heart of even what this piece is about, but that there are many ways of saying, there are many ways of communicating, there are many ways of dialoguing, and a lot of those ways get ignored too, or are not heard, or are dismissed because maybe we expect something else, something different, and I want to pay attention to those ways, or I want to try to pay attention. All we can do is try. So yeah, I think that's basically what it's.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Leila, I wanted to ask you also about a phrase from one of your stories, and again, I feel like there's a lot of different things that I could ask you about. I loved the collection. There's so many, such a diversity of genres. I mean, there's stories that are funny and stories that are scary and stories that are emotional, and all the different voices that you took on in it. But there was one thing that stood out for me. I think it was in the story called The Beekeeper. The phrase is, she knew about men using their faces like fugitives use a meter in a cave.
Meter?
And now I'm suddenly realizing that might have been a typo. Maybe it was like a flare or like a lamp.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact phrase, but what I was trying to get at was the way people use their expressions, their public forward face, their projections of friendliness, of disarmament, to sort of disarm people. And this character in particular is the beekeeper, and he ends up being a very menacing, frightening person, but his friendliness is so put on, and she, as this lawyer who deals in cases of violence, kind of recognizes it immediately, what he's doing with his expression and his face, and even the lines that have been riveted into his skin. And she's like, a part of her is like, she just, something pings for her at that moment. And then it does come to happen that, yes, he's not the best of people.
Right. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Thank you. So Rachel, could you tell us? I mean, you talked a little bit in your intro about the project, but I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the genesis of it. I mean, it's rare to find a collaborative duo doing this kind of poetry and performance together. So could you tell us a bit more about how it came together?
Amelie and I knew each other from around Montreal, from performance and, sharing stages and stuff. And I think there's that thing where if you are somebody who reads regularly or performs, there is a community and there is a network, and it collaboration seems quite natural in a way after you've already kind of shared stages. I'm so happy to be sharing a stage with you too. I also didn't know we were going to be doing the chat. But I think it actually felt really natural because we knew each other's work, we knew each other's style because, we'd seen each other and we respected each other and so there was that element in terms of the collaboration. And the language thing didn't really seem that important. I mean, I will say when it came to actually rehearsing the 2 shows that we had written instead of 1, and we switched the roles, so we had to do everything twice, and we got half the funding that we wanted to do the production, and at one point we're like, what have we done? Why did this seem like a good idea at the time? It seemed so easy in the conception stage. But actually, it was lovely that it seemed easy. It seemed very natural that we were here and we just had practices that were in different languages, but what we had was a very common lived experience. And so in terms of the genesis of the project, it was summer 2022. We were at an outdoor poetry reading, a long outdoor poetry reading, in Park Belle-Rive. We didn't listen to any of it because the 2 of us got chatting at the back. And we're in a moment of going, I don't know what to do. Like, we have these girls and they're in crisis and we're in this weird role. There's a a poem, quite a short poem, quite a pointy wee poem, in the book about taking third place, you know, and particularly both biological parents are still present. The step-parent role, there was a huge amount of learning about stepping back and going, I have the third place in this. I'm going to take the bronze, and I'm going to be happy with that, which does not come naturally to some of us, you know. And actually, you know, part of the play and the suite of poems is finding a way to reconcile with that. But it had come from a point of frustration and this sense of going, why are the only models we have for this crazy Disney stepmothers who had come from the Grimm brother fairy tales, who, by the way, sorry, I will shut up in a minute, Malcolm, I promise.
I'll let you know when it's going to get out of control.
Just throw a mic at my head. So the Grimm brothers, when they were writing in Germany in the early 1800s, a lot of the fairy tales that they had based their stories on, which became the definitive versions, it was the mother who was mean or cruel to the child, or had abandoned the child, or had, you know, the child had fled from. So you think of Snow White and Hansel and Gretel. A lot of those stories had been the mother, and because it was a moment when they were really trying to promote the unity of the family as a solid social unit, they couldn't have the mother being destructive, and that's when the external stepmother got introduced in, because she could be seen as, oh, this person who just arrived and was evil and menaced the children. So those Grimm boys have a lot to answer for.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to open up the floor to any questions from the audience. Last time around, when we did our last reading, I asked people to keep the questions brief, and they did not heed this request. So I'm just going to say again, keep your questions brief. It's a win-win for everyone. And if you can't do that, I might just accidentally overlook you in the next time you raise your hand. Yes, over here. Just behind you.
Michael.
So I have a very brief question. Subtext. That's my question.
Subtext?
The question is the single word subtext with a question mark? Okay, they don't have to be quite that brief. A sentence would be...
So if an actor is told to play the subtext, I kept thinking about that in Oana's work, for sure. If it's your job to expose the subtext or have the reader find it.
Okay, so is it your job to expose the subtext or to have the reader find it?
That's actually a neat question, but it wasn't a question, it was just a word. But I think,
There was a follow-up.
yeah, there was, true. I think you lead the reader to, like, you're writing the subtext, definitely, but it needs to stay subtext. And I think it's really exciting for the reader if they find it. And that's where you find your readers. And, you know, some readers don't find other writers. Like, it's you find your reader when that reader gets your subtext. And I'm always writing subtext, but to me, it stays subtext. I don't like bringing it too much to the surface, because then it's like, what's the point? But yeah, neat.
Anyone else want to tackle that one?
Sure, I agree with you. I think, you know, as a reader myself, too, I think it's a collaboration with the text. I mean, you bring things to the text. You bring your day. You bring your history. You bring your languages. You bring your current moment. But then also the text needs to bring things to you, and you know. Provide clues or some kind of ways in to all the layers that might be there. And I like to, personally, I work with all that's available to me as the page, the way the things are, the way the words are laid out, the way that they move, and then when I bring it into this kind of space, I also have the sounds function in certain ways. It's not random. It's chosen for the pieces, and yeah, so that's part of creating that some kind of mood, but it could also be a different mood, because I think all texts have more than one subtext at the same time.
Yeah.
Rachel, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of thinking, we're just direct, we just lay it all out there, but it's to do with the genre that we're working in, because this was always meant to be heard, and so it has a temporal quality, right? It has to unfold over time, and so the audience who are listening to it they don't know what the end is, unless they've come back for separate times. So how are we hinting at the subtext over the course of the performance unfolding and the poem unfolding, and where does that bring them to? And there's a lot of this is also ironic. We're saying one thing, and we hope our tone of voice, how we're actually performing it, the effect that we're bringing to it, is saying something else. So we are hoping very much that the audience finds the meaning in the middle of those two things, in the space of those things. So I think that's the medium we're working with.
Thank you. Okay, we got a bunch of questions here. You were next. So the question is gender important, or gender confusion important to you, and how does gender provide inspiration in your work?
Both looking at me. Do you want to answer?
Well, no? You do.
I think I have one story where it's not clear that the narrator she's female or male, and I only realized that much later. Somebody assumed it was a male narrating. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't struggle with gender. Sometimes I write from a male perspective or female. Sometimes my motivating character is male. I'm fascinated by men, I would say, and the male, the way men move through the world. It's very different from female, and I'm just really fascinated by their privilege, but also the burdens that men carry. And I think sometimes I write to that. I write about that. But I don't struggle with gender. I just feel, I guess as a writer, I feel gender fluid. Maybe as a person too. Yeah.
I mean, we called it the Stepmother. But we also made that decision that it was this was one story of one particular type of woman who was coming up against the context of bearing children, and how that is for cis women in the world, and all the historical context and baggage that comes with that. And actually what happens to the concept of femininity, if you are a woman who could bear children but chooses not to. How does that change the definition of woman, if that has been what woman has been defined with for so long, and we are seeing in the States that rising again and again. We are still fighting that. And so that's one thing. I will also say that we interviewed, so there's also the gender role in terms of childcare, which becomes very interesting, because actually a lot of the blended families, the dad will take on the primary childcare role rather than the stepmother, and so that's sort of confusing notions of what the gender roles are seen out in that. So that complicates things as well, and should complicate things. And I had a third point, which is totally... Oh, and we also interviewed, we interviewed a lovely stepfather who is a stepfather of adolescent boys in actually Northern Ireland, where I'm from, which has very traditional ideas about gender roles, and particularly masculinity. And this person who we interviewed, who's a darling, he was sort of seen as a lesser man, because there was the dad who was the alpha male, and the mum, and then him. And so where did that leave him? And it leaves him as an incredible human being who deals with that idea of masculinity, and the criticism he has received with a huge amount of grace. And I hope the society around him will shift, rather than he has to shift or see that. And so he can go and write The Stepfather at some point, and I'll look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
Oana, did you want to add anything?
I move around. I like to work with all the genders, yeah, and everything in between.
Okay, we've got a couple more.
Question for Rachel: how have the stepchildren reacted to the book, or the performance, or the combination of the two?
How have the stepchildren reacted to...
That is a really good question, and it is a very fair question. And I will give you an honest answer, which is one of them has reacted well and thought it was fine, and the other one has found it difficult and confronting. And that some things were brought to the surface that I think they were perhaps not ready to deal with. And that has been really difficult. I'm not going to lie. It was not expected, and we've come through it. But we took so much care trying to write the book and to do the play, and yeah, that was difficult. But thank you. It's a fair question.
Two questions for two different authors. First of all, when you were putting that music out and then your voice over the sounds, which was wonderful, really enjoyed it. Was it dystopian? Was it something like a Blade Runner, or was it something where, I mean, there's a certain mysticism to it, but I'm also getting the space and the disjointed communications.
Was it dystopian?
Well, I mean, there's some dystopia in it, for sure. But there's hope, I think, too. It's many kinds of voices. But what you might be interested to know is that all the sound, the roots, the raw material for all the sound was captured, some of it live, some of it pre-recorded, with an electromagnetic microphone, which basically captures the sound of electricity. So these are sounds that completely surround us, and we might feel them, sometimes as vibrations, depending, like if you stand next to a generator, for example, but that are inaudible. So they have an eerie kind of presence because they're present and yet not present. And so that's why I was interested in mixing that with all these types of voices.
And you had a second question.
Second question, well, I have been a stepmother who hasn't had my own children also. So I thought it was magnificent, but my question is related to that gentleman. We're interlopers. Mm-hmm. There's the original mother, and there's the wife of their father. When you were doing this, were you interviewing or thinking of the children's reaction?
We were thinking of the children's reaction.
Yeah, we were. We tried to take as much care as possible. I mean,
Not necessarily your own, but the children in general that have a new woman into.
so what we had hoped to do, and to a degree, I do think we've done, is tell the truth as gently as possible. Well, some of it's a bit angry.
As possible. That gives you some, wiggle.
Yeah, but we're angry about, society. But poetic. But I mean, there are things I think to be cross about in terms of the portrayal. But also, we say it begins with a love story, and actually the big question is, and the thing that the whole thing focuses on is actually that relationship between the stepmother and the child, and what does it mean to love someone else's child? There's a line in it about when affection is acquired rather than innate. We examine the idea of oxytocin and the chemicals, the hormones that come in from touch and skin and all the rest of it. And actually, because the most important thing in this relationship is how you care for the child and that the child feels loved. And children, it's a very Western thing that a nuclear family, that a child can only be looked after by two people. That is now we haven't gone too far out of that because that would be another thesis, but we did our research around that, and that notion that a child can only have kinship bonds with the biological parents, for historical reasons, is very Western, really quite Christian-based, or certainly Western religion-based. And so, you know, the idea was to go, look, it is difficult. We do not have rule books. Nobody has showed us how to do this. And there's a shocking lack of guidelines on step-parenting. But it is possible to form a relationship with somebody else's child, and that to be nurturing, and that to be loving. You can't help loving them; they're kids, you know. And those relationships can bring something, we hope, to the children as well, without it creating a burden. That it's a richness, and that's where we try to get to. I hope we do by the end of it. But there is an art, because there are very difficult periods to find it that way. So I hope your experience was good.
I think we have time for one more question, and I think I saw a raised hand over there.
I was related to the others, but it was about writing about personal experiences and taking the others that you writing about into account for that, and how just I really listened to your thought process about care that you want.
Is that for all of us, or just?
So
yeah,
the question is to talk about your process of speaking about personal experiences from another's point of view.
It's more about writing about personal issues, like being a stepmother, extremely personal. It involves the lives of others, or writing about others. So the thought process about how to take care of that.
Got it. So what the thought process was like about taking others into account when writing about personal experiences?
I think our experiences are more common than you think sometimes. That was what we found in terms of certainly doing the interviews. We were like, okay, like there's touchy subjects here, but 6 out of 10 interviews have also experienced these touchy subjects. Now, that doesn't mean that's not confronting for somebody who's also lived through that to read it, or to see it presented on a stage when it is spoken in words. And I think it's a balance between for the work to be honest, it has to touch on the difficult as well. Those situations don't need to be made specific to, you know, we went on holiday and played football and she fell over and broke her ankle, which didn't happen, by the way. You know, but so, you know, change the gender, change the age, change the characteristics, depending on what you're writing. And I think, but it did surprise us how much commonality we could draw from those things. I don't know if that helped. Yeah. There you go.
I think my stories are tangential. They pull from my personal experiences, but they're not autobiographical. There's one story in there that's the most autobiographical, but I'll never say which one. I don't feel comfortable writing my own story. I love telling stories. I love imagining people or scenarios or setups or subtexts, but you know, I'm not drawn to telling my story. But it definitely pulls. I mean, there's a lot of things in there. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I don't really write in an autobiographical fashion, that's for sure. But of course, everything that I do write goes through me, so it is very personal in that way, that it has to go through my body and my mind and my experience. Sometimes I can draw on personal experience, but nonetheless, I feel like I try to approach, even though it might not be someone that's personal in my life, whatever subject I'm kind of dealing with, I do try to approach it with care. Care is still like an important aspect. But it doesn't mean that that has to be, but because I have a personal relationship with whatever the person or the situation. But I want to do, I don't know, treat it with care in order to be able to be with it, actually.
Well, Leila, Rachel, Oana, thank you so much. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Don't forget to support our authors. Their books are all for sale over at the table there. And enjoy the latest MRB and stick around for a little more chit-chat with us.
Nice.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you. I really